Hi. So this is going to be the animation flashback, Spider-Man 2, talking about the latest and greatest 480p goodness on the Xbox, the original Xbox One, not the new Xbox One. This has nothing to do with the new Spider-Man game. I'm Ryan Duffin. I'm an animator at DICE. That has nothing to do with anything we're about to show here.
You have something to do with it.
Well, what was our titles at the time? I was an animator at Treyarch when we were working on Spider-Man 2. This here is Jim Zachary.
Hello, Jim Zachary. Yeah, at the time, 2004, I was the lead animator on Spider-Man 2, and this is Tomo.
Hi guys, my name is Tomo Moriwaki, and way back when we were working on this project, I was the creative director.
Yeah, so today we're just going to do a little flashback. We're going to play through the game. As you see behind us, we're just going to kind of talk about some of the animation challenges we had. It's kind of we haven't actually played this game since, I don't know, what, 2005? So yeah, we're just having kind of fun looking at it. But we're just going to kind of talk about it, what went through our minds, some of the challenges we hit, some of the road bumps, and some of the good times we had. So if you have any questions too, just put it up in the chat room and we'll try to hit them all. So yeah, Spider-Man 2. This was an open world game in 2004. It was actually...
It was the first open world Spider-Man game of many, right?
Yep. We actually discovered the open world system during Spider-Man 1. You want to play? During Spider-Man 1, and it was someone really smart actually decided not to put it in Spider-Man 1 because they realized how much of a challenge that was going to be. I don't know who's made that call, but it was a lifesaver. But we realized we wanted to save for Spider-Man 2 because it was so awesome. We really wanted to focus the whole game around it. And Jamie Frinstrom, right? He
the lead coder on Spider-Man 1.
Yeah, the lead coder on Spider-Man 1. Actually, was it a weekend he discovered he worked on this thing, or it was pretty quick?
He put together a prototype that allowed him to directly connect the webs to the buildings, because the first Spider-Man game, you basically had kind of like assisted flying, and the web would fly up into the air and connect to a kind of an invisible ceiling. And of course, that was a common complaint for the early Spider-Man games. And so, kind of the story goes, he over the weekend put together this little prototype, and it was very interesting. At the time, we couldn't really do that because it required you to, you needed a game like Spider-Man 2 to have this kind of swinging. The open world and being able to travel from one end of the city to the other, those are kind of essential. It's an essential geography that's necessary to kind of gratify a control scheme that offers you so much flexibility and control over Spider-Man. And there was a really important point when we were working on Spider-Man 1 and we got a chance to see that first movie. The dynamic swinging experience that you saw on the screen blew us all away. Nowadays it seems we're all accustomed to it, but I think
you see how dated it is with something like this.
I think we're laughing at how old some of these graphics look.
In the facial animation.
But we saw the movie and we were blown away by Spider-Man swinging around New York City. And from that point forward, with the help of Jamie's prototype, we did everything we could for a good long time. It was probably a 15-man effort over the course of many, many, many months, 6, 8 months. And we continued working on the player package for the entire project. But in the end, we were able to kind of recreate that really dynamic fly-around-the-world experience, kind of half out of control, very fluid. I think one of the mantras for us at the time was constant, uninterrupted motion.
I need to invert the camera. I was wondering why I can't play this.
You're not supposed to use the camera. Remember, back then, camera controls were new.
Yeah, that was right. There's a lot of conversation, actually, around the cameras. Yeah, that was one of the big challenges of actually creating this game was the camera, because you could do so much. You could fly down the street going like 120 miles an hour. You can climb on the wall. The transitions between jumping, swinging, crawling, going around corners, going under the ground. Actually, during this, if you do a jump, we created something in this character too, and it was pretty new at the time. But it was a camera route, and when we created this camera because when you at first we had it connected to the character's to Spider-Man's his hips, and when you jump, you'd get really big jerks in the motion. And also when he did a flip, the camera would kind of come in and out because as his waist would go. So we created a camera route that would actually, when we animate it, we can move that camera route to the middle, and he'd spin around that camera route, and the camera would actually stay in place, so it would actually look right when he did his jump.
I failed a mission of some sort.
Yeah, failure. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It is fun, though, looking at, I mean, I know we worked on it, so we put a lot of time in this, but we actually kind of feel like it still holds up a little bit after so many years.
13 years.
13 years.
13 years.
Yeah, 13 years. Yeah. But anyways, just to give a little background, because we're talking about animation, Spider-Man himself in this game had over 1,000 moves. We had 51 characters. Majority of them, some of them got cut, so I think we actually have shipping with about 40. There's roughly 20 to 50 moves per character, because some characters were just like Aunt May, who would just talk to you. Oh, there we go. And other ones were really complicated, like Black Cat and like Shocker and so forth. And then animation-wise, it was basically Ryan and Tim Smarlovich and John Loft. We only had a crew of about 5 people actually working on this whole game. And 2 of them were working on cutscenes most of the time as well. So it was a really small crew back in the day. And we would just hammer out, we just would animate all day. We had 5 to 10 animations a day. I think the record was 12 animations done in a day.
I think we got to the point where we had to do like a cutscene a day. These were all keyframe too. There was a lot of stuff in this game that I probably should have realized, like, oh yeah, maybe we should mocap that. Like I spent 2 months animating guys getting into and out of cars, because it always bothered us. Like the way, like, I think GTA 3 at the time, they were like, you know, amazing game, but people would still like, you'd get into a semi-truck and you'd like scale up, you'd like kind of float up to it as it was opening. So we're like, we're gonna nail car doors. I'm a car guy, you know, gotta have people get in cars the right way. And we had all these weird characters, and they got a little bit cartoony, these thug characters. We had like 3 different thug skeletons, and one of them was like 7 feet tall, and these cars were normal size, so like they'd have to get in, and we'd put their ass through the floor and just kind of contort them around in a way. Oh, that's amazing.
There's an amazing facial.
So there's a fun story with the facial animation. That was it was one of those things that we weren't sure if we were gonna have facial animation, and this was 2004. 2002, 2003, these decisions were being made, but we almost didn't ship with it, and it got to be sort of like the risk assessment didn't quite add up, and I think probably too many people got involved in the decision. Probably. And yeah, and never again since. What wound up happening is that the engineer in charge of it was a friend of mine, and we wound up like talking about it, taking it offline. I think this is sort of the importance of knowing your coworkers and what they can do, what they can bring to the table. But we talked about, you know, we had a big meeting, and everybody's in there like, oh, it's too risky, and we talked about it afterwards, and we're like, you know what, I think we can just do this. And we both just stayed late that night, presented the demo the next day of like, actually, facial animation works, this is fine. And you know, the facial animation's not great, but it's better than it would have been because it wouldn't have been there.
And back in 2004, too, you didn't really have to have facial. Nowadays, everyone has it. And, I mean, there's people in this room that do amazing jobs with facial. But back then, we could just have a puppet. Like we literally, during the gameplay, not cutscenes and stuff. Sometimes it's just we'd have the mouth open and close, and depending on the wave file from the audio, it would either open the mouth all the way or just a little bit. So you just had like the blah 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 puppet, and that was good enough at the time. Tomo was like destroying things there. I totally forgot you could attack cars and pull people out. Tomo, what was some of your great memories from Spider-Man 2? I'm going to play a little bit.
So something I'd like to talk about is how the game design tools work together with the animations for combat. In the end, these were all keyframed animations cut into tons of little pieces so that we could be branching out of them whenever we needed to. And every single combat animation had its own set of time dilation values and kind of frame tolerances for blending into the next step in any given combo. We had this fun idea where we would try to mix the use of webs into the normal fight, so you could like punch a guy twice and then fire a web at him, and it might make his head covered in webs. Or you could punch a guy, hit jump in the combo, find yourself flying up in the air, web yank the guy that was on the ground up into the air, beat him in the air and air juggle him for a bit, jump up in the air again and again and again, ultimately go into like finding some invisible ceiling in the world and then doing a 1,000-meter spinning pile driver from the top of the world all the way to the ground. That's awesome. Tons of fun stuff. A lot of, like I was saying about the time dilation, we made a lot of use of it. We also have this kind of spidey sense mode where things slow down a bit, where you get feedback for counterattacks. It was an interesting idea there where we were trying to make a game accessible and still have Spider-Man's reflexes be a part of it. So we can't have players we can't expect players to respond within a few frames, and so instead we slowed time down. But I mean, that time dilation was used across all manner of features with the animations, even swinging around the city. You know, in order to, if you went too fast, you would beat the streamer, and you would find yourself in a city that wasn't there. You should probably explain what the streamer is. Yeah, okay, so in an open world, of course, you can't, the thing that allows you to go continuously from one part of the city to the other is that we're constantly bringing in new sections of the city. And there were some pretty strict performance limitations with regard to that. And so when we first got it going, we wanted to go as fast as possible. That's what we loved. We loved the feeling of that speed. We'd spent all this effort to get this sensation that we all kind of fell in love with. But hard limitations are what they are. So we made use of, we slowed time down just enough so that your speed would cap. And then that slowdown, since it came along with the audio would pitch down as well, it created this great feeling of like, whoa, while you're going faster and faster. And you're not going slow. It wasn't slow at all. You were still going like what felt like 100 miles an hour. It's just that the world started to pitch down. I think we also did a field of view change. And actually, a kind of a fun note about that is when we first implemented that feature, you could go so fast that you could actually flip the entire field of view so that it would go all the way around, and then it would crumple into this tiny little point. That with the speed, with the time slowdown and the audio pitching down, that's the closest thing I think I've ever come to traveling through time.
Sorry, the one mic thing's kind of weird. The one thing that I totally forgot about this. This is such a cool touch, and I kind of remember the conversations that led to this. It's this when we're like, oh, this is a really cool thing that we did. We're so awesome. But this, like when you jump, and then if you keep pressing the jump button, it's not actually doing anything but taking cool poses. And it seemed like a very Spider-Man thing to do, but it makes the jump totally responsive, even though it's purely cosmetic. But it's like, look at me, look at me.
Yeah. I remember those conversations too, just because when you jumped, and you're flying through the air when you get a lot of speed, you want to do something while you're just floating there. And also after seeing some of the movie and some of the stuff, the previous stuff we saw early on, you want to have that kind of like strike a pose in the air and continue on. I just Ryan mentioned poses. When we did this swinging, each Spider-Man game we kind of took this swing and enhanced it and moved it and made it better, all the way up to the last game I worked on was Web of Shadows, and we were still tweaking it. But on this one, this first open swing, we literally had it where you had a circle, and depending on where you were in the circle, it would just blend into those poses. And later on, we actually had animations that would transition between the two, so the swing got much more, it got tight and really fluid. And not only that, we had intros depending on where you entered in that circle and how fast you're going. But this is back early on, before we really had time to figure all that stuff out. And what's funny too about tackling this thing, I don't know if we were just naive or we were just, excited at that time in our careers, but we just charged. Like we didn't really even think things through too much. We're like, all right, let's do a swinging. Okay, well, we'll blend between that little loop. Okay, I hit the wall. What do? I hit the wall. Oh, okay, well, yeah, we'll slide. Well, wait, Spider-Man doesn't slide, but it feels good when you're playing. Okay, we'll slide. Then we had conversations too about if you smack into the wall going at full speed, what does he do? Right now, he just bounces off. I think later on we made it so he'd splat in later Spider-Man games. And I do have to apologize because I did so many Spider-Man games that they all kind of blur into one now. We were warming up. We were just kind of loading the machine, see if this old Xbox would work. I'll take a picture and post it because it is an old Xbox. And we're talking about Goblin, and we're like, oh, yeah, we can play as Green Goblin. We're like, oh, no, that's Spider-Man 1. That's not Spider-Man 2. But that happens. Yeah, we won't go down that trail. Actually, I don't know. Can we talk about that?
I think so.
Yeah, I think we could talk. That was Spider-Man 1, though. We'll stick to Spider-Man 2.
I'll tell the story. Hopefully as safe as possible. In Spider-Man 1, we had this cool thing that I think near the end there was our coders were doing Easter eggs where you could play. I think you could play as basically any character in the game. Like it would all play with Spider-Man's animation, but it was just like it just play on their skeleton or something like that. But they were human characters, so it was mostly fine. Did it actually rescale the character, or?
I think it just played it on Spider-Man, so it would scale them a little bit, but they were close enough.
Right. Sorry. Anyway, but yeah, so you could play as basically any character in the game, and all the cutscenes were in. Well, there was the pre-rendered cinematics, but then there was also the in-game cutscenes, and so your character, whatever skin you chose, would be in the cutscenes as well. And so you could play as Mary Jane, and then you get into the cutscenes with Mary Jane, and Mary Jane would kiss Mary Jane, and there was some trouble after that, and that's the end of that story. So we're gonna you can throw in questions at any point here. So we have one question. Oh, yeah. So Adam the cat, meow, has asked, was it difficult? Wait, sorry. What was it like animating such a well-known character? Were we influenced by the comics? And yep. Yeah, I think you should take that.
Yeah, I'll take it. You know, it's like a blessing and a curse for that one because there is so much material out there, and it's, you know, we all loved Spider-Man. This character is an amazing character. So that part was a total blessing. It's easy to find all that stuff. What made it a little challenging is that you also don't want to screw it up because he's such a great character. But, you know, there's a book out there called, like, Drawing the Marvel Way. I should have wrote that down before we started because I don't remember who actually created it. I'm looking at Tomo like he would tell me. Yeah. He's a smart dude. Yeah, we could Google it. But that book saved us, and it was really all about hitting those key poses. The classic one where Spider-Man's kind of curled up in his little, he kind of pulls his legs up and puts his hands up. Another one was really trying to hit the hand poses, even though you don't see him too much up close. I felt like if you got the hand poses, you're like in the spirit of Spider-Man. And the combat in this game happens so quick. I mean, you're hitting, like when he kicks like that, we just saw, Tomo's in Spidey speed right now, or Spidey sense, so things are going a little slower. But it's like frame 6 or frame 8. So we did a lot of, in the combat, during the animation, we had little, we can create these flags, and we could say, we basically said when to stop and freeze motion, so we just hold that hit. So a lot of we really didn't have anticipation, which you'd think you'd have in animation. It's one of the 12 principles, but we really didn't have anticipation, so we actually sold it all on that little pause or on that follow-through. You want to punch this guy so you can kind of see what we're talking about? Oh. There it goes. You can see just there's a fraction of a pause there. But having the animators add that flag and then hand it off to the scripter, this is back in the time before we had tools where animators can actually hook that stuff up. It gave the scripter a spot to say, okay, the animator is saying that I can scale this animation or I can hold it, and during the spot here, and it's going to look okay, somewhat okay in game because his feet were either on, both feet were off, or he was on the ground. We had other flags too. I mean, if we want to talk about that stuff, since this is an animation talk, we had a move begin and move end, so the scripter can actually know when to like translate Spider-Man or spin him around so he could hit a character. So we can try to keep his feet on the ground a little bit.
Those are just note tracks in 3D Studio, if I remember right.
Yeah, they're just note tracks, and we made at the time Evan used 3D Studio Max, and we used 3D Studio Max on this game too, and Biped. And actually, it's amazing now that I think back on it. You know, teams now, we have huge departments of TDs and people creating animation tools and setting up rigs and constraints and so forth. We had one TD on this game, right? It was. There's
like a second TD out there.
Yeah, I know. Shoot, why'd you ask me that, Ryan? It'll come to me in a minute. But yeah, there was one guy, and he basically skinned and created everything, and he spent most of his time on Doc Ock's tentacles. And yeah, for the most part, out of the box. Did you? Oh, Ryan was the TD.
I didn't make it work.
Yeah, out of the box though, we had all the tools you needed. We had IKFK, we had constraints, we had We were able to switch animations between characters with ease. We could save out bipeds, and as soon as the rig changed, we could just put them back on there. I do think having 3D Studio Max was a reason why we were able to ship this game with the crazy set of animations within 2 years and with a small animation team.
So you've heard it here. 3D Studio is better. So. There was one other part of that question that I think is like something that I've done. Like my last GDC talk was on this, and I think we're all as animators pretty evangelical about reference. Like we had all of the Spider-Man comics in the office. I wasn't like super familiar with the character when I started doing this, and then for Spider-Man 1 anyway, and just started reading like all the comics, and you just like you see not just like look at pictures of the poses, but like learn the character and all that stuff. It was like. Okay. Oh, sorry. We've got 5 minutes left. All right. Yeah. So I guess that's the thing. Reference. Do your reference and learn more than you need to know. It wasn't just pictures. It was knowing the character.
Yeah. And when we start on a new character, so Spider-Man is a good example, but like we had Kraven in this game and Calypso. Kraven didn't ship, but we had Kraven, Calypso, Doc Ock. Something to do once you have your references is spend some time just creating those poses on the character. So you can, you push the rig, you can push the poses, and you start really getting into that character when you start playing with the poses a little bit more like that. We got another question. Oh. Something better.
Hi, Katie.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there's how much back and forth was there between the studio, the movie studio, and the game team? There could have been more. I'll put it that way. There was some just because we have to. We were smart. These guys were smart when designing the game. They actually just said, "Hey, we're going to live like a layer beneath the movie, so there'll be some crossover, but for the most part, we're going to be like under the movie. So there'll be other things going on, like Black Cat. There'll be Mysterio. That's right. Quinn Beck. So those characters weren't in the movie, but they were main characters in ours. So then we just had a couple levels that would come up and touch the movie with Doc Ock. And we had to have like the big moments in there too. But we tried to stay away from the film. We were able to get to read the script, some of us, and it was funny because they basically locked you in a room for 2 hours and you just had to read the script. But we read the script and it came out and we're like, okay, let's do it. And the script totally changed later on anyway. So it's always a challenge when you're creating a game for a film, because sometimes it's like, who represents the property more? Is it the game or is it the film? And some people have a harder time with that than others. And the film did have some issues with Black Cat. You want to talk about that?
I don't remember, actually.
This is a good story of Ryan, because this is where I could so Ryan was working for me at the time, and he did all these awesome animations to Black Cat. She was really seductive and kind of flirty and whatnot. And they came back and they said she's too sexy. So we had to figure out ways to make her less sexy, and without having to redo all of our animations. So I remember telling Ryan that, and he looked at me like, I am going to punch you in the face. And I was like, it's not me. We can figure it out. So what ended up being a quick fix for a lot of that stuff was just adjusting the camera a little bit. So, a lot of these cut scenes, we start in on her butt or something, or her legs. You remember this? No. He blocked it. That was mine. And so we just kind of tilt the camera up a little bit so we didn't start so low on her legs, or pull it back so it wasn't so close on her. But yeah.
I have something kind of interesting to add here. You see this flagpole behind Spider-Man? This is an open area of New York, and it didn't really work very well for Spider-Man swinging. So we put these 40-meter tall flagpoles in the middle of the area so that you could swing around there. And actually, something else I'd like to add is, in our combat animations, when you hit, there's a brief dilation of time to kind of sell the impact. And I think, for all of us, this was the first time we really kind of had to do a serious game that understood how fight mechanics are implemented in video games. And so probably the biggest thing we had to understand was that a hit has to feel much different than a miss. And we did we added a lot of features, and we just kept adding features. Like when he talks about us just hitting the road running, we started and basically didn't stop for a good solid 26 months or so.
There's a lot of work.
Yeah, and to be fair, we may have lacked some discipline, and there was a lot of stuff that got cut. We were young. We were like the analogy of the bee that doesn't know it shouldn't be able to fly. I mean, there are 81 300 by 300 meter districts of buildings that kind of recreate New York City at 1/4 scale. We have all these little micro events that are happening around the city constantly, many of which we added entire animation sequences, at least dynamic animation sequences, to make them work, like fighting a car, like carrying this guy to the hospital. And it's just very hard to convey. It was so long ago. I'm so much more reasonable now. It's like this experience of having this talk is almost making me scared of the earlier selves we used to be.
I think we're almost wrapped up here, but there's two things. There's like 2 points about this game that have influenced every game that I've ever worked on since. And the first one is that anytime people have played this game and they're like the swinging. It's all about the swinging. The swinging happened from, like, Tomo kind of touched on it, but like we had the whole city built in gray box. Gray box is like no textures or anything. It's just a bunch of geometry to swing around. And they did that for a long time. And this is like the importance of prototyping and gray boxing and like nailing your mechanics before you worry about the story or the textures or any of that stuff is so important, and it gets missed on like so many productions. And then the second thing is that there's a lot of people who are like, oh, DLC, I hate DLC. And like the part of that earlier question was about things getting cut. Like a quarter to a third maybe of this game got cut. Heroes, boss fights, minions, tons of stuff. And that's something that, like, if DLC had been a thing back then, we could have, like, oh, well, 3 months later we ship an extra 15 hours of the game or something like that. There was so much stuff that got cut. That was a good lesson on how much to detach from your work, because Jim and I both at least lost 6 months worth of animation to the abyss.
And to add to your prototyping, we spent months iterating on the basic shapes of these buildings. These buildings don't recreate New York necessarily. What they're entirely built around is the Spider-Man swinging mechanics and it feeling good. And that's not just something you plan out and do. It's something you do over and over and over again until it gets good.
All right, I think is that time, Mike?
Is that good?
All right. Hey, thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed the game. Bye.